Hello, I'm Ben Carter, Joe Watkins. We were the architects that did the restoration of the Walton County Courthouse in 1994. Joe and I had nicknamed the courthouse back then because we talked about it so much, so we called her the Empress. Ironically, 20-something years later, we ran into her little sister called Her Majesty. But the courthouse was built in 1883. It has a very colorful history. It went through lots of changes to accommodate the changes in society and times and economic situations. But in 1883, it was probably the finest courthouse in Northeast Georgia. The modifications that it encountered were driven by economics and by social change. One thing that was extremely interesting and difficult to figure out, and Judge Marvin W. Sarles helped me figure it out, when we tried to rebuild the courtroom, we couldn't figure out what size and shape the balcony was. There were so many different levels of renovations and changes. We had determined that it was similar, if not identical, to Hancock counties because they were the same contractor and the same architect in 1881 and 1883. So we knew what it should look like, but the scars on the wall were confusing. So one night, 5:30 or so, Judge Charles and I were sitting in the courtroom, and I said, Judge, I just can't figure out what all these scars mean on the wall and what shape this balcony was. And he said, you know, maybe there was more than one balcony. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the balcony I remember, he was born in 1936. He said, the balcony I remember was really big and really deep and flat. And I said, well, that's not at all what the balcony should have looked like. So he said there must have been two balconies. So as we studied the project, the building more and more, we realized that the original balcony had been taken out in 1933 and they had built back a really big balcony. And so the balcony was doubled in size. Well, when it was doubled in size and people stopped coming to court as much in the 60s, they had all this wasted space upstairs in the balcony, and they decided to turn that into the grand jury room. So they built the grand jury room, and then they had all that space under the balcony, so they turned that into the judge's office. So the courtroom was cut in half, the ceilings were lowered, heating and air conditioning was added, paneling, and apparently Judge Charles had something to do with selection of the floor tiles because they were red and black. So the red and black asbestos floor tiles were put down, probably in the 50s and 60s, but that was probably a little before Judge Charles' time. But his daddy was a sheriff at that time. So anyway, so we start rebuilding the balcony. We start replacing all of the heart pine floors and putting the Empress back together. Joe, what do you have to say?
I was just going to say some more information on the renovations. The 1933 renovation was part of the WPA in the Depression, and that was when a lot of it was modernized as far as steam heating, radiators, electric lightings, that kind of thing. In the 1960s, just like everyone else, the county was trying to determine whether they want to tear it down and make a parking lot or modernize it. So, you know, we're critical about some of these things they did to it in the 1960s, but at least they didn't tear it down.